What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the Game Time Discussions. I'm Emery Cousins, sitting here with Cameron Selby, and we're going to be doing the power rankings for pre-week 14. It's going to be our last power rankings of the year before the playoffs begin, and then, of course, we'll do a power rankings for the playoff teams and the teams that did not make the playoffs. We'll talk about those guys as well, because I'm sure some of y'all's teams will not make the playoffs, including mine. But talking about the power rankings, and that we'll get into, of course, there's a lot of constant changing on these power rankings, and teams getting better and getting worse, but there's also teams that we didn't expect to be good and that were good early in the season came up in the power rankings, and now they're slowly getting back to where we actually expected them to be. So it's a lot of fun. These power rankings have been great, and we're going to continue to do it all the way up till until the playoffs. So
Yeah, I mean, with this being said, we kind of have a barrier threshold of what direction teams are going. Some are just kind of we're salvaging picks. Some are we're going to try to salvage to make the playoffs. Some are just the contenders, true contenders, up top. And there's really only to me about 5 teams that have a shot to win it all,
That's
or
fair.
even get there for that nature. So usually, I feel like there's been years where on one side of the conference it's pretty wide open, but really it's just kind of a couple teams in the AFC, maybe a team or two in the NFC, and it's kind of pretty self-explanatory how we're going to go about it. So
Yeah.
but let's start it off. The bottom 4 teams, these are all teams vying for the first pick in the draft. Start with the Giants at 2-10. They are the losers of, I believe, 6 straight. They also in the recent 7 straight, actually. Since this last power rankings, obviously Daniel Jones, they not only benched but released him outright. So truly they're in tank mode to find their next quarterback. They've gone to Tommy DeVito. They went to Drew Lock. Neither seemed to be even close to the answer. Both of them did not perform well in their spot starts over the last 2 weeks. So really it's just them versus the Raiders, who are identical records, vying for the top pick, which will be determining probably Shadur Sanders at this point.
Fun. I love that we're fighting over a bad quarterback class. It's awesome. No, but honestly, with the Giants, like I think that they actually did a really good job drafting last year, so that helps at least like kind of bring the feelings up in that organization, because they did get Tyron Tracy, who was kind of a gem. They did get Malik Neighbors in the first round, Drew Phillips, who was somebody we didn't even really talk about, who was much later, Tyler Nubin. All those guys are really good, so I think that they actually have a good outlook. I don't believe that it's the best thing, obviously, to be 2-10, but at the same time, I think that at least their young guys have looked good, and they have some pieces to build around Brian Burns and Kayvon Thibodeau and stuff like that. Dexter Lawrence was out also, which is
Yeah,
really
he's now
tough.
out
So
for the year. He's been banged up and all that good stuff. But I mean, really, it's just kind of packing it in,
yeah,
finding what you got. You probably got about
who are you gonna pay?
10 to 12 core players,
Mm-hmm.
which is probably pretty solid. I don't know if even the Raiders have as that much comparing the two teams. Obviously, the Raiders have more defensively. They've that's the direction they've gone more in recent drafts,
Mm-hmm.
and on the offensive line overall, it's better. But really, it's just 2 tough situations that probably should be undergoing head coaching changes, but I don't know really if either one will, which is kind of what puts both of these teams up in the air.
I would love a new head coach, and I don't mean that in a bad way. I like Antonio Pierce. I just don't know that he's a head coach. I don't know that he was ready to become a head coach at that level. But going on to the next team, Jacksonville Jaguars, just falling apart, and not getting any better after the big hit on Trevor Lawrence this last week, by Aziz Al-Shaair, and he should be in a lot of trouble for a
Yeah,
long
he
for
ended
a
up
little
being
while.
suspended for 3 games.
Good.
So pretty hefty punishment, but he's also kind of had a couple of
Yeah,
these types of
he's
hits
yeah.
in recent years. But again, Jacksonville, it's just kind of a lost year, and kind of one of those where it's you want to rip the Band-Aid off a situation that just is not working out well. And Trevor Lawrence, even though he's second straight year at the back half of the year being banged up, he missed a couple games due to a shoulder injury,
Right.
came back his first game and then was not playing great, and then was concussed. So really it's just a lost year. Him and the um, Doug Marone, Doug Malone, Doug
Doug
Peterson.
Peterson.
Goodness
Yeah,
gracious.
yeah.
Doug Peterson
He
did
needs to
not work
go.
out at least like I thought they would. I really thought that was a great hire, and I was wrong about that. But really, for what it's worth, Jacksonville, they have the tiebreaker between these 3 bottom teams for the first pick.
Right.
So if they were to lose out, obviously we look at a schedule that really it's not that difficult. They do get to play Tennessee twice, Jets twice, or Jets once, which is also on the list, and then at the Raiders, also on this bottom four, and then at the Colts, which is one of the worst,
Yeah, tough. Yeah, it's
good
not. Yeah,
teams or
worst.
good
Worst.
record teams.
Yeah, middle
Really,
pack teams.
there's a lot that could win them out of the first pick. But if they were to hypothetically hold on to this first pick, they could probably get a pretty penny from one of these two teams having a bidding war for one of the top quarterbacks, which is pretty solid way to build their team. I mean, you've seen recent drafts where people throw 3 first-round picks and are able to rebuild a playoff team just because of the assets that they accumulate.
Yeah, absolutely, and some breaking down from there. The next team, the New York Jets, they have been disappointing to say the least. 3-9, and we weren't expecting that. I don't think. I think even you might have had some reservations on them, but I never would have expected them to go 3-9.
Well, yeah, no one expected them to be this bad. This is the worst. I don't even know how to describe it. The most disappointing good team that I can ever remember.
Yes.
Obviously, we started the year both picking them to win the AFC East, and they had the number 1 ranked PFF graded D line, linebacker core, corner, and then DB room. And then obviously we're just like, hey, you were a 7-win team with Zach Wilson. Just
same
put
players.
in Aaron Rodgers, and lo and behold, you got way worse with him. And
sold your coach, and
this just kind of shows how poorly coached teams or bad team chemistry can really derail a franchise or an organization. They have a top 12 roster, and they're all the way at the bottom in our first slide, which just unfathomable. But I mean, the last 3 of the last 5, 3 of them on the road, and 2 of them at home that they probably won't be favored in. It's a real rough time to be a
definitely an uphill climb, to say the least.
Really, all 4 of these franchises, it's really hard to see upside in them having an instant turnaround, like we've seen from recent teams, like a Houston just 1 year later being a South champion and then obviously being a playoff contender. I don't see that for any of these teams going at least next year. But it just kind of depends on, if a Jacksonville can get a king's ransom and see what happens with them. But the Jets are in the same path of, they actually have the more difficult schedule. So if they find a way to get the top pick,
that would be pretty impressive.
Who knows? But then obviously if they end up being the team to pick Shedeur, that's just going to be another laughable situation.
Yeah, should be fun. Going on, though, another AFC East team in the New England Patriots. We actually expected them to stay in the first slide. They have moved from the first slide to the second slide, graduating to the 28th spot. They were 32nd last time we did this, but winning 3 games seems to be good enough to pass up all these other teams that have been so bad.
What I like about it is I feel good going forward with
they have the quarterback.
They've been playing hard.
Yeah.
Their quarterback showed signs at least to where, hey, we're going to give this guy a chance for a couple of years.
Right.
And they have good pieces, but it's one of their worst O-lines that I can remember.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, defensively, they still need a lot of work. But it's got the core. I just think that they need the right OC. Gerard Mayo may or may not be the coach, but he hasn't done enough to derail a locker room or be kind of polarizing like an Antonio Pierce has been with the with the Raiders.
Yeah.
That's basically the gist of it. That's why they've graduated to the next slide, is that they've been losing in the right ways.
Mm-hmm.
Losing a close game to the Rams, losing at the last second. You did pick them outright against the Colts. And
I did also pick their spread, though.
Yeah, you did. 4-1 on the week. Another incredible week for incredible year for you on that. But yeah, the Colts, the perfect way for a rebuilding team is just, hey, I'm beating this team, and then they beat me last second, and I keep my draft spot.
Right,
and
for sure.
Just keep on nailing those picks, New England. Right now, they'd be 4th in the draft, and they don't need the quarterback. So basically, they're the prime position of best available offensive lineman.
Yes,
is right where you need to be. I think it's a little too high for a weaker receiving class to even just pencil in one of the wide receiver one, but they're in a good spot going forward, and I like where they're at. Obviously, they're on bye this week, but at Arizona, at Buffalo. They play Buffalo 2 the last 3 weeks, and then a home game against the Chargers. They're probably going to lose all 4 of those games, go 3-14, have a top 3 pick, and just be in a good spot to do things this offseason. And they're not paying anybody. Last offseason, they came into it with the most cap money. They didn't do anything with the cap money. And so we expected this kind of a season. but maybe they were just being patient and waiting a year. This is a really strong, at least a receiver free agency class.
Yeah,
If you
that's what I
wanted
was
to
gonna
help with
say.
that, get a lot of bargain bin guys at positions and just kind of really get a strong roster going.
Yep, and then the Tennessee Titans moving up 2 spots. Tennessee has been pretty poor this year, but they are not as bad as some of the other teams. They actually did play. Who did they play close recently? I remember. Oh, they beat Houston 2 weeks ago, and then got smashed by the Commanders. It was a little bit of an up and down for them, but they did play some tough games recently. They did play the Chargers. They beat the Patriots, but they also played the Lions, the Bills. So they had a hard run right before this rankings, but they did come out with 2 wins.
They have one of the worst point differentials in the league this year.
Yeah.
But the thing is, they get the nod because they did beat New England outright back in Week 9 in a close game.
Yeah.
And I like to honor head-to-heads, especially if it is a somewhat recent outcome. So really, Tennessee, another one that's rebuilding. They're kind of in more of a flux because I don't know what their direction is because they kind of invested in a lot of short-term options this offseason, obviously with Calvin Ridley paying a big bag for him, Tony Pollard, a temporary back, Will Levis has shown flashes, but he hasn't really done enough to he's kind of like a Drew Lock or Sam Howell in the sense of just like, hey, I can be your guy, but like season long, there's a lot of boneheaded decisions and makes, and obviously for the first month and a half of the year, every single week he had a viral pick in a wrong way.
Crazy funny videos where he puts his head down running and stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So but they have a reasonable schedule to end the season. Obviously 4 division games to end the year, but 2 of them against Jacksonville, home game against Houston, which they already beat Houston, and then Indy at home or on the road, but in a dome, reasonable, and then home against Cincinnati, who's been disappointing. They'll probably lose that game, but they're probably going to salvage and get to 6 wins and be in the back half of the top 10. But they just kind of have a lot of things to do with this roster, and they're kind of a team in a kind of a purgatory because they spent on a lot of guys, and it just like I don't know how much of those guys are long-term options. L'Jarius needs another guy.
Hasn't played.
Exactly. So don't really know where they're going, where they're heading, but they're here for now.
Fair enough. Cleveland Browns, one of the more disappointing teams on the year. We did talk about they had a very wide set of outcomes, in my personal opinion. Obviously, I had them winning or going to the playoffs. You did not because of it's just the Browns. They seem to figure it out how to not do it.
I just didn't trust the lightning in the bottle that helped them win the North last year, or not win the North, but be enough to get 11 wins as a wild card team and have the number 1 defense. Obviously, they dealt with some more injuries on the defensive side this year, and really it's just been very inconsistent quarterback play. At least Jameis has been enough to put points on the board, but he also is asking the Lord to deliver him from pick sixes because he, is very inept in doing those mistakes, but he'll also throw for 500 yards in the same game. But I mean, he's had, uncomfortable losses against losing to New Orleans in a revenge game by 21 when they were coming off 6 straight losses, I believe. Not a good look. Obviously, home loss against the Chargers in a blowout. Pittsburgh, they won, but it's a snow game. Very hard to just kind of they're playing each other this week, so we'll see how actually relevant or how much to take away from that win. And then obviously Denver gave up a lot of points, but I mean Denver's the better team, and it was closer than it should have been. They were just giving up too many big plays, so they're another team that they're stuck, fully guaranteed for Deshaun Watson the next 2 years.
Price.
There's not anywhere to go but down, and then the core players that they've been kind of dealing with and paying with, the offensive line, they've been one of the best in recent years. Nick Chubb, obviously, kind of fading into the twilight of his career. I think the best thing for them to help salvage their situation and kind of turn it around similar to what Denver is, as they're paying Russell Wilson a record amount of dead money, is just kind of selling every big piece you got, other than the one you just drafted, which was Patrick Surtain. But, the Bradley Chubb and all these guys, getting what you can for him. You can get 2, maybe 3 first-round picks for Myles Garrett. And if you traded him away, it would make you worse. But it's not like he is going to help
win a Super Bowl or win the division this year.
Win a Super Bowl
next year.
Division. This is one of the toughest divisions still in football. You're not really going to go anywhere up with your current situation. So the only thing that can really help you salvage or turn your future around is assets.
Yeah, for sure.
And that's kind of the only asset other than maybe Denzel Ward. Maybe I don't even know if you can get a first for him, but you can get some pretty solid compensation for him still. Those are really the two assets you got. And that's kind of the only way I think you can really turn this around in any way in the next season or two.
Yeah. The Saints, they're funny. They move around this power rankings like crazy because they win the first 2 games of the year by combined, I don't know, like 70 points. And then the next 6 games they lose, 7 games they lose in a row before winning 2 games in a row again and jumping back up our power rankings 6 spots. They're all over the place, but they do get the Giants next. So and the Raiders are on their schedule coming out, so they do have a chance to get some more wins. Not probably going to be one of the top 3 picks or 5 picks like I expected them to be at the beginning of the year, but I don't think they're far from it. It's just the Saints, they're in cap hell, and I'd expect them to get worse after this year. So
I told you about how bleak it looks for the Browns. Browns are going into the offseason negative $14 million under the cap.
82,
Saints are
right?
$62.8 million under the cap. And last year they were around this number, but they did extensions and pushbacks to kick the can down the road one more year to help. There's no more cans to kick.
Yep,
you extended Alvin Kamara for some reason, and really there's no one else to do. You've already traded Marshawn Lattimore, and all of these guys that you've extended in the past, releasing them helps you really nothing at all. And they're going to strip it down to the bones. And this was the year that we didn't believe in them, and we thought they'd have a top 5 pick. They're on the outskirts of that right now.
Yeah.
But at the same time,
wait till next year. It's going to be worse.
They deserve to be on the bottom slide of outlooks going into next year and beyond, just because of what they've got going for them. And then obviously the head coaching uncertainty. And that's not an attractive job at all for them, the Browns, any teams like that. So it's really tough going forward as a Saints fan.
Yeah, and then going over to the next slide, we got the Carolina Panthers, who have been playing better as of late. We did have the situation where they bench Bryce Young, and we talked about that. They bring him back, and now he's starting again after, I believe, Andy Dalton gets injured a little bit, and he's been playing well. Brings last 2 games, Chiefs by 3. Last 4 games, 2 wins against the Saints, 23-22, and then they beat the Giants. And then the next game they play the Chiefs at home, 4 games in a row at home. Chiefs at home, lose by 3. Bucks at home, lose by 3. Those are really good losses. If you're going to lose, like you said earlier about New England, those are good losses. That's how you lose. The biggest
thing is they had a perfect 4 weeks for how they should do it. I mean, you get a couple of upsets, but you still kind of stay low enough to where you're still flirting with they're currently the 5th pick in the draft right now, and obviously you look at their schedule going forward. Philly, Dallas, Arizona, Tampa Bay, at Atlanta. You're losing what I mentioned about New England. You're probably losing minimum 4, but all 5 of those games, and then you have another top 4 or 5 pick, and you can kind of assess your situation in the offseason. But I've been impressed by Bryce Young. I think he saved himself to go into next year pretty comfortably as a starter, and hopefully they just kind of keep on building around them. They invested in basically all young skill players in Jonathan Brooks because they really get. And all these guys, Jatavion Sanders, another one that was having a solid rookie year, and they, invested heavily in the offensive line, which has been better at least this year. And so continuing to do that, having another young left tackle as well. It's just a young team that just needs to get some vets around and more experience, but they're fine going forward to me from a cap perspective. I think they're let's see where they're at.
Probably in the early teens.
Yeah, they're kind of middle in the pack right now, wherever they're at. Oh, yeah. They're probably around 19th right now.
Okay.
But reasonable amount, 33.6 mil to invest in, and they're just doing fine. I think every single week of the last 4 weeks, they were touchdown underdogs, and they won outright twice, and then a walk-off field goal against Kansas City to lose, and then an overtime loss to Tampa Bay. That's as good as you can ask for a team that is significantly less talented than all 4 of the teams that they played.
Exactly.
And being able to win 2 and then almost win even 2 more is just impressive to say the least for the roster that they currently have.
Now, a really disappointing team in the Dallas Cowboys coming up next, 5-7 at this point. They are winning games, and it's actually hurting them more than helping them, in my personal opinion. Winning the last 2 games against Washington and the Giants. They did not move up our power rankings because they're still playing Cooper Rush and not Dak Prescott. And also, I believe Deron Bland got re-injured, so that wasn't helpful. But because he needed, you have no trade value for him anymore.
But at the same time, he was. This is not a great contract year for him because obviously you usually see guys motivated and ready, but he broke his foot to start the year and then he got re-injured and just has been playing okay, but has not lived up to his obviously record-setting year last year. But yeah, it's just a gross situation for them. Don't know what to really make of it. You're kind of stuck in what you got. Salary cap wise, you're actually have 23.1 million, which that's probably only because you didn't go all in like everybody thought,
right?
Perceived that you would. Probably will help them in the long run that they did not. But at the end of the day, they're just not a great team. I hope they end up with the top 10 picks so they can rekindle some assets because they're actually a really solid drafting team.
Yeah.
But right now they're 5-7. They have 2 straight wins against Washington, which was one of the weirdest games of the year.
Craziest game
and
ever.
Then also the Giants, which you're playing Drew Lock, so that means nothing to me. The reason that they're behind a team like Cincinnati is that they're almost a touchdown dog at home to Cincinnati. And then at Carolina, who's been playing the best football of the season right now. Then you have a home game against Tampa. Well, guess what? You suck at home. And then obviously Tampa is fighting for a playoff spot because only one team out of the South is going, and they got swept by Atlanta. So they need to win as many games and outwin Atlanta the rest of the way. They're both 6-6. And then at Philly, they will get smashed once again. And then Washington, I don't know if Washington's going to lose twice to Dallas. So 6-11 would be the best ideal situation if you are a Cowboys fan to go into next offseason, have a top 10 pick, like I mentioned. And because you don't need a quarterback, you get probably better value as the 8th, 9th pick because there's probably going to be 3 quarterbacks that are drafted in the top 8, and none of them deserve to be. So you're going to get a top 5 talent in a spot if you end up tanking the right way, and that's probably the best way to salvage what's left of Dak's prime.
Yeah, I think that this team is just in shambles right now and they need to figure something out. The Bears are also a team that are in shambles, but they have a better outlook than I think they would have if this was 2 weeks ago because Matty Eberflus has been fired. And he was seriously an issue when he's telling the media that he was okay with the outcome and that it kind of happened exactly, how he wanted it to and this and that. And I'm like, well, you're losing games in situations where you should be winning games. 2 field goal opportunities, not even taken one of them, and then the other one blocked because of not even trying to move the ball forward. A Hail Mary given up to the Washington Commanders. It's just been a absolute shit show in Chicago, and they're wasting what's funny? I texted this the other day, but everybody's all over Caleb Williams. He's not good, yada, yada. Well, he actually has he has the most passing attempts by a quarterback without an interception as a rookie.
Yeah. He's had that for 2 games. And he's extended his record because he hasn't thrown a pick in, I believe, 6 games.
Yeah. So
in all 6 of these losses, I don't think he has 1 interception. He has not been the gunslinger that we hoped he would be to start his career. And a lot of that has to do with coaching, but 14 touchdowns, 5 picks from a rookie. Pretty strong. My thing is, this is the best and hottest job for any head coach candidate by far because you have cap space. You have a young quarterback that's already, established. Like, say what you want. He is their quarterback, and he is going to be pretty good as long as he has the right coaching because obviously the biggest thing with him is that he was not the generational talent that people perceived him to be. But guess what? Trevor Lawrence wasn't either. And a lot of it has to do with not many quarterbacks can go into any situation just be relevant wherever. We have seen very few in our lifetimes that have, and those that have, again, I've brought this point up before. Aaron Rodgers, only 1 Super Bowl, hasn't been in 14 years. Peyton only has 1 in his prime.
Yeah.
Brett Favre only has 1. Dan Marino never got there after his 2nd year. John Elway had to get all the way to 37, 38 before he finally won one. And we're expecting, generational talents to just come in and just immediately be great. It doesn't happen. It's all about coaching. And that's why it's the hottest job. You got cap space. Look at the schedule at San Fran. I know they're banged up, San Fran, but at San Fran, they're a 6-point dog right now. At Minnesota, Detroit, Seattle, Green Bay, all 5 playoff teams right now, other than San Fran, which you're on the road. Like I said, 6-point dog. You end up losing the rest of the way, which I don't expect them to. But again, top 10 pick, all the assets you can ask for as a coach. You just need to revamp offensive line and just go for it with the money that you have, and you're going to instantly turn around. And even though they didn't, meet our expectations this year as a wild card team, obviously that also has to do with how well Washington and Green Bay and Minnesota have been, because nobody expected them to be 9-3, 10-2, 8-5 respectively at this point in the season. I think they're an easy bet to make the playoffs next year, and they're probably going to be great odds because they're going to be projected as one of the worst record teams at probably 7.5 wins.
Right.
And I'm going to bet the over, and I'm going to bet them to be a playoff team again next year.
Fair. And then the next team is the Cincinnati Bengals. This is a really sad one. Joe Burrow has had a MVP-like season based on his numbers, but is going to not make the playoffs. Even if they go 9-8, it's going to be difficult, and they can't lose another game to get to that point. They do have Dallas, Tennessee, Cleveland, so 3 teams that are beatable. And then Denver and Pittsburgh are the teams that you have to worry about a little bit more. At Pittsburgh at the end of the year will be the most telling game of the year, in my opinion.
Yeah, they just can't be good teams right now, and I don't know what the issue is, but obviously they basically wasted the last year of the combined Joe Burrow and Ja'Marr Chase rookie contracts. Obviously T. Higgins is gone. They should have traded him like we kind of really wanted them to in the offseason. We talked about that all offseason, that they brought him back for a contending season. It's just like, you get a 2nd-round pick for him, and now you're going to lose him for nothing, is what it is. And then now Ja'Marr Chase, you didn't want to pay him. Well, guess what? He is on pace to beat our bold predictions of touchdowns and Triple Crown winner, all that good stuff.
And you're going to have to pay him more.
And you're going to have to pay him more now. So you could have got him for just a penny more or $1 more, whatever he asked for more than Justin Jefferson. Now you're going to pay him about $5 million more, and it's going to suck for you because you just won't have the money to do anything else, really. And it's just unfortunate. And on top of that, all the investments that they've made on the offensive line just keep not working out. They just can't figure it out for whatever reason. That regime just needs to change in some way, shape, or form. And they are in real trouble of just really losing a quarterback in his prime. And you don't really see that until recent years.
Right.
And a lot of times the grass isn't always greener on the other side. But in Joe's situation, you don't see guys going for 30 touchdowns and 5 picks and just being 4-8 and just not even having a chance coming in December.
Yeah, it's really tough to watch just because he is such a good player and they do have such a nice young core to not have this. But it is a defensive issue more than anything. If you look at it, they've not been able to stop anybody this year, and they're giving up way too many points to be able to stay in some of these games.
Yeah, as of right now, they are 3 games back of the 7 seed, which I believe is the Denver Broncos.
7-8. Wait.
No,
Denver,
I'm lying.
Did Denver just win?
Yeah.
So they'd be 8-5.
So that is a full 3.5 games back. You basically have to win out, which not far-fetched if you look at their schedule. On top of that, you get to play
Denver and Pittsburgh.
Yeah,
who are both teams that are going to be in.
You can kind of salvage a little bit, but I think it's too tall of a task to climb, and you would have to have Denver basically lose out or lose 3 or 4.
Yeah.
And I guess they possibly could. We'll just kind of have to reassess, but it's really, there's only one path, and it's them playing perfect football and
getting
Denver
lucky,
just absolutely off of their bye, just shitting the bed, and I just don't see both of those things happening.
Yeah, it's pretty tough to see it happening like that. But going on to the next one, the Indianapolis Colts move up a couple spots to the 20th spot at 6-7. They have an opportunity to make the playoffs. They are the 8th seed in the AFC, but they're a game and a half back on Denver currently, being 6-7. So I think that, and I think we talked about this. I think you think they might be able to make it in. I'm not as confident in this team, but at the same time,
here's the thing: if they beat Denver coming off the bye, they're going to make the playoffs.
That's fair.
And the reason being, obviously, they're a game and a half back, but winning that, you got Tennessee, New York, and the Jags. All of them are right now top 7 picks. They're all 3-9 or worse, and they're all going to be favored in every one of those games. And I just don't see a way, if they beat Denver, that they will miss the playoffs. Because Denver, on the other hand, if you wanted to just kind of pull up their schedule, they have to play Houston and Kansas City,
Chargers,
Chargers.
Bengals.
So basically, for at least the Colts, their path is a little easier to predict because Colts just got to win 3 or 4, but one of those is Denver.
Yeah.
And then Denver has to lose 2 games.
Yeah, that's fair. And they get the head-to-head at that point. That's the tiebreaker
Exactly.
that they'll need to pass Denver up, in my opinion. So I agree with you on that. Looking at the next team, you have San Francisco, 5-7. They have been pretty poor. They did play in the snow this last game, and both of their starting running backs, Christian McCaffrey went out, and then Jordan Mason, who started for them a lot of this year, is also out. So Isaac Guerendo is now their starter. They've had issues with keeping Trent Williams healthy and Nick Bosa healthy, and who else? There's their linebacker. Fred Warner. Yeah, he's been out. So
let me ask you this: which situation going forward do you hate more between Dallas and San Francisco?
San Francisco.
Yeah,
it's got to be.
That's the answer.
Because they're just in cap hell, and they can't pay all the guys that they have, and
they already did. So they're gonna have to release them prematurely. And they're gonna
Trent Williams, like they're gonna have no left tackle.
Yeah, they just paid Debo. He's having his career worst year, and you have to cut him because you just drafted first-round receiver.
Which is dumb as hell.
You just caved in, and he tore his ACL. So we'll see how that goes. CMC, another washed year. He's now going on his 29th season.
Mm-hmm.
He's the highest paid running back by far. George Kittle is going to be 32. Trent Williams is old. Obviously, Nick Bosa and Fred Warner are still in their prime. Defensively, they don't have as much aging, but really, and on top of that all, you're forced to pay Brock Purdy $55 million.
Which is the reason that they can do it is because they don't have to do that.
Yeah. And the only way that they really can salvage is by saying, you know what, thank you for what you've done, but we're going to let you walk for nothing. And if they do that, that's the only way that they can really save any kind of core, because the reason their window has been open this long is because they went back-to-back rookie contracts with Trey Lance and then now Brock Purdy being at the helm. And then Jimmy G, even though he was serviceable and okay as a starter, they weren't paying him a ton when he did come over. Obviously, they traded for him before that spike that happened, and they were able to release him without much guaranteed money or dead cap.
Yeah.
So really, that's the only way, is if they just part ways with Brock and they salvage themselves with a cheap quarterback. That's the only way that they're going to keep this window open in the short time that they do. And I don't even know if that's the right decision.
They luckily have the coach to do that, because I think you could even draft a player out of the late round of this class and be fine. It's just,
who would you say your favorite quarterback was in this class by default?
In this coming class?
Yeah.
I can't do that. No. I don't know. Honestly.
Is it still Garrett?
No. It's favorite quarterback for where they're going to go in the draft is going to be Jackson Dart.
Okay.
Where they're going to go. I hate Shedeur and Cam Ward in the first 10 picks. That is incredibly bad. I don't think Jalen Milroe makes any sense that early, because he will go first round most likely. Give me Jackson Dart in the late second.
Because I was going to say with Garrett Nussmeier, kind of
he's probably going to come back
this season. But if he did come out, for just hypothetically, he was one of those that was a tweener of he could go up to the top 10, but he could fall because of performance in LSU and
Carson Beck. What Carson Beck did, basically.
Carson's just never going to be a good quarterback.
No. But I mean, that's what happened.
A Garrett Nussmeier type.
Yeah.
Going there
would make a lot of sense.
But obviously, if you think he comes back, and that is what it is. But I'm just trying to paint a picture of San Francisco kind of salvaging what they have, because they're in a very, I don't know, crossroads. Right?
Yeah, for sure. Going on to the next guys, though, we have Tampa Bay. We have a pair of NFC South teams we'll talk about together: Tampa Bay Bucks and the Atlanta Falcons, leading the division at 6-6. Both of them in the bottom half of our power rankings here. And looking at Tampa Bay, they actually have what I would be considering one of the easier schedules to end the year. They get to play the Raiders, Dallas, Carolina, and New Orleans, all teams that we just already talked about. The only team that they have to play that's completely, considered more difficult is the Chargers. But it's one game out of the 5. Like I'll take that.
Yeah, but I think we can just kind of lump these two teams together, because it's really one of these are moving on, one is not. The thing is, Atlanta, once again, they won both games against Tampa, so Tampa has to have a better record, and that's why they're above. But I actually would side with Tampa weird enough being the better team,
They are.
and they are riding higher. Obviously, Atlanta's 3 straight losses. Tampa, they've won back-to-back games convincingly against the Giants, and then a scrappy Carolina team almost knocked them off, but they were able to hang on and win following a Chuba Hubbard fumble. Both of them have a pretty reasonable schedule this week. Obviously, Atlanta has sucked in recent weeks, but they both play the Raiders, and then the Falcons play the Giants at home, Washington, who has not been playing as great, and then Carolina, who obviously Tampa just played. So really, can Atlanta lose 3 games? I don't. The thing is with me is I don't know if Tampa can get to 10 wins,
Right.
but I also don't know if Atlanta can get to 9 losses, and that's the thing that's going to be tough for tiebreakers.
So you think they're going to find a way to lose to one of those 4 teams? Do you think
Yes.
that Tampa Bay will lose to one of Vegas, Dallas, Carolina, or New Orleans?
Yes.
Okay. Well, then that's fair. I think that's a fair thought. I will just say that they win the games they're supposed to and lose to the Chargers, or they randomly beat the Chargers because that's what they do, is beat good teams for no reason.
I mean, for what it's worth, from a Vegas perspective, Tampa's going to be favored in 4 games, and Atlanta's going to be only favored probably in 3. They're dogs this week. I actually might be picking them outright this week. And in Washington, obviously, they're going to be a dog, regardless of if you think they win or lose. But essentially, that's what's going to happen. Have to happen is Tampa is going to have to win probably 4 to feel comfortable, but maybe all 5, depending on what Atlanta does, because it's not like their schedule is rough either.
Fair enough. Going on to the next slide here. At 16, we have the Miami Dolphins. They are 5-7, but they are on the come up because since Tua got back, they've looked pretty good. They do not play well in the snow. That is, or in the cold. They just don't. And we had this conversation. I actually watched other people talk about this and say, "Oh, well, these are NFL players. They're going to be fine in the cold." And I'm like, "No, they literally have never been fine in the cold."
Did you watch the warm-up video?
No, I haven't. But
so basically, everybody in Green Bay shirtless and sleeveless shirt, all that stuff,
having a good old time.
Everybody in Miami
freezing their ass off,
coats on over their head, like gloves on, all that stuff when it's taken in, and it's just like you can't do that when you have a reputation going into the cold and expect 12 straight losses in the cold. Or I think the threshold is 40 degrees or less. For that stat.
I actually did hear that.
But yeah, like you can't just say, "Oh yeah, we're a new team, we're gonna embrace it," and then just not embrace it aesthetically. That's just not how you do things. But obviously they got their ass whipped against Green Bay on Thanksgiving night. But the thing is, they're 2.5 games back of Denver, which that's the breaking point. And Denver has a tough schedule. Miami is pretty reasonable. The problem is 2 of the easy games are in the cold.
Freezing cold. Yeah.
So one is a night game. And so it's just like one of the things of what are you going to do about winning both of those games? Because you do have to win both of those games. Obviously, San Francisco, you get a break because not only are they going cross country, but this is not the San Fran that we thought they would be. And they're also just entirely banged up. But going to Houston, I think is going to be the deciding factor of if they make it or not. And that's just in 2 weeks.
We also gave them a lot of credit for beating, of course, the Rams was a good game. At the Rams, they did win that game, but then they went and beat the Raiders and the Patriots, which we're not necessarily excited about. That's our 28th and 31st team. So Miami, we don't really know how good they are, but watching them play against the Packers, I would let you know that they're probably going to lose those last 2 games of the year and not make the playoffs.
Yeah, I actually, because they don't play Denver this season. Obviously, we talked about Indy and Cincinnati, who are also in the race. They play them in the final 5 weeks. Miami doesn't, so I don't know tiebreaker-wise, top of my head, which one will prevail if they ended up with the same record. But at the end of the day, I think Miami at minimum needs to get 4 or 5 of these games, and I just don't think they do.
Fair enough. Arizona has looked really good. Let's put these next 3 teams together. I texted you about this. I was like, well, I don't know what to do with this.
I don't either.
This NFC West grouping here.
Basically, Arizona looked great, but then dropped back-to-back games. Seattle beat them, but then Seattle lost to the Rams. But the Rams, first matchup, they got beat by 31 against the Cardinals.
Yep.
Obviously, that was a completely different team with an entire offensive line out, plus Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua. So if they played again, which they will be in Week 17, I probably am going to pick the Rams.
Fair.
The thing is, just all of them are probably good enough to make the playoffs, but only one will.
Yes.
And that's going to be the tough thing because the Rams have a home game against Buffalo Buffalo doesn't have a bunch of possible losses on the schedule, and this might be the only one I think I can feel possibly good about.
Okay.
And I don't even know if I can pick them outright. But at San Fran, even though it's a road Thursday night game, this is the perfect San Fran team to play in that regard. At the Jets, obviously, Jets are not what they used to be, but it's a cross-country matchup. But then you end the season home games against both Arizona and Seattle.
Yeah,
So
telling games.
I think with all three of these teams, because all of them have pretty tough schedules, really 9 wins get you there. It's going to be a 9-win team rather that makes it, but I don't know who's going to be the tiebreaker. But if the Rams are able to knock off both Seattle and Arizona, that's going to be a huge thing going forward for them. So really, they're in 13th, despite having a 6-6 and being in third,
Right.
because of the fact that I think going forward, they're the team to beat.
Wanted to point this out. Seattle is 2-2 in the division. The Arizona Cardinals are 2-1, and then the Rams are 2-1 also. So everybody's basically neck and neck everywhere you look across the board. There's nothing that really separates them. 3-4. So conference record, right? If you're going to talk about another way to separate them, well, Seattle's 3-4. Arizona's 3-5, and the Rams are 4-5. So nothing is separating these teams. There's a reason this is the hardest division to figure out, and that's why they're 13th through 15th, and they're going to stay that way until they get to play each other, which we'll talk about obviously going forward. But I think this is a very fun. This is by far the funnest division to look at. Most of the divisions are already kind of figured out for the most part. This one's at least fun. I can't believe the AFC West has 3 teams right now in the playoffs.
Right. And I think from an NFC playoff perspective, I think it's a good thing that only one will make it. Because I bet you dollars to donuts, any of the elite teams would rather play either of the NFC South teams over any of those NFC
because
West
they're
teams.
actually they're all good teams. It's just they're beating each other up, as you can tell.
Yep.
And then going on to the next team, it's the Denver Broncos. We kind of touched on them multiple times in this video, but they're 8-5 and they're outplaying themselves. They were in cap hell starting this year. We expected nothing of them. Bo Nix has been really good. I always want to preface this though. Let's keep talking about the fact that he's old. He's much older. He had all those starts in college, and look, it really works when you come out later in your career, and you're more ready for the NFL.
And we talked a ton about when the pairing of Bo Nix to Denver, if it were to happen, that would have been
Perfect.
the best case scenario for at least Bo Nix.
Yes,
but for Denver possibly as well. I mean, because they weren't going to get up to the top 2 in Caleb or Jaden, so that's not even debatable on would they
Drake
have been
even
better?
Yeah,
Drake May, same thing. Maybe there could have been a way to get up to 3, but that was 3 first-round picks. So 3 first-round picks plus Drake May or Bo Nix, who instantly turned their team around.
And Cap Hill. Don't forget about the Cap Hill.
Yeah, the most guaranteed money in NFL history that they gave up, obviously releasing Russell Wilson. That is the most unorthodox win-win breakup that I've ever seen, with Russell Wilson going to
It's almost as good as
Steelers.
Jared Goff, Matthew Stafford.
Yeah,
almost.
But at least both of those teams were just like, hey, we think we're close. The Rams, we need to find the last piece to get us over, which did. And then Jared Goff still in prime, but he helped get Detroit over the hump to get into contender status. These were, I need to stop sucking. What is the best way to stop sucking?
Go away.
Go away.
Go help Pittsburgh not suck. Apparently.
And yeah, it just is what it is. I mean, kudos to both teams for figuring it out, and it also comes down to coaching, because Mike Tomlin doesn't have losing seasons. Shame on us for thinking that he would.
Could. He won't.
And then with Denver, obviously Sean Payton had a rocky start with his unorthodox approach to things, but he's got the right match, so that kind of is what it is. I want to note, though, every single team that they've won against, all 8, none of them are a winning record team.
Fair. 2
of them being the Bucs, which is a pretty quality win because it was on the road by 19, and then obviously Atlanta blowing them out. That's good, and they're both 6-6. So technicality, that's why they're included in that graphic. But then the teams that they've lost to, all of them are winning record teams. So 8-0 against teams without a winning record, 0-5 against ones without. If there's a single team in the AFC that you want to target to play in the playoffs, it's Denver.
Fair. Yeah, absolutely. Completely agree with that. One thing I will say, though, is we talked about this before the season, and we talk about this all the time. Your schedule matters. And Denver just happened to fall into a schedule where they're going to probably play. If you look at the board, you can add those teams to it. Indy's under 500 right now. Cincinnati's under 500, so they're going to get 2 more teams on there. I don't know if they'll beat them, but 10-7 is kind of if they do win those types of games.
The thing is, I think that Denver finishes 9-8. They lose
that's
to
fair.
one of Indy or Cincy, and then they lose to both the Chargers and Kansas City. But at the same time, it's worth noting Kansas City could be resting starters in there.
Yeah, it's last week.
Fair. But I will pick them to go 9-8, and I just don't know if Cincinnati, Miami, or Indy can do enough to get up there. It just kind of depends on tiebreakers and all that good stuff. So that's why it's so important for Indy and Cincinnati to win those games, because I think there's a path for Denver to be a 9-win team. But can you get to 9 wins yourself?
Right.
That's the biggest case in point for the final seed.
Yeah, and then we'll go to Houston next. Houston's actually been poor. They're 8-5. They've had some bad games in recent weeks. In the last 5 weeks, they're 2-3, including losses to the Jets and the Titans. They did have a really easy schedule. We expected them to actually win almost all these games, except for maybe the Lions, which they lost in the craziest fashion you could ask for. 5 interceptions by Jared Goff. But I just don't know that I trust this team at all. And that's really scary. And I know they're 11th. But
I think they're the only preseason top 10 team that we have that is not in the top 10 that didn't suffer a ton of injuries.
Fair.
And obviously, receiver injuries, that's one thing. But CJ Stroud's been playing awful for 2 months now.
Yeah.
And sophomore slump, call it what you want. But, I mean, the only quality, where's the quality win since Buffalo? Which Buffalo, we kind of acknowledged back in week 5 when they did upset Houston, that they botched the way that they approached the end of the game when it was 2020, and they just threw it 3 straight times.
Yeah.
Threw 11 seconds off the clock and then punted into a territory where Houston was 5 yards away from field goal range. Ended up kicking the game winner. But I mean, losing to the Jets was a bad loss. The Detroit Lions one, I guess, was a good loss, being only by 3. But the Tennessee
how
loss
it happened, though, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, you were up the whole game, 5 interceptions, and you lose the game.
That's
even though it's a good loss on paper, but it feels bad. Tennessee at home lost, bad loss. Jacksonville close, not good.
Trevor Lawrence plays that whole game. I don't know that they win that game.
Anthony Richardson goes 10 of 32, and they only beat him by 3. Dallas, obviously, that was a Cooper Rush game that just you won a convincing game against a bad situation, bad team. What are you going to do? I told you about Denver being the team that everybody wants to play. Well, if there's a wild card team, because obviously all 4 division winners get a home play, where do you want to go? Do you want to go to Pittsburgh? Do you want to go to Buffalo? Or do you want to go to Houston?
Oh, it's not even a question.
Exactly, and I don't even think that Houston would be favored against any. Or I mean, at this point, it's going to be the Chargers or the Ravens,
right? Because
they're pretty comfortable ahead of everybody other than Denver, which we expect to pull back a little bit. But it's going to be one of those 2 teams, and either of those teams I would pick outright. And on top of that, I'm pretty sure both of those teams would be favored over Houston.
Oh, yeah, I'm picking whoever's playing Houston in the first round, most likely. And it does because it's
going to be the 5 seed. It's going to be the best wildcard team.
And they're good. They're we're going to talk about them. And Houston is not good. So they also have one of the easiest divisions in football. We have to kind of note that they do have Jacksonville and Tennessee in that division. And then the Colts have been, lackluster to say the best.
Well, I talked about in the preseason. Obviously, I was wrong about Jacksonville being a possible competing for a wild card. It is what it is. But I did say I wouldn't be shocked if Houston just kind of struggles to repeat their performance and get back into contendership, and maybe even as a result pull back enough to where somebody sneaks away with a wild card win. But I mean, you lose to Tennessee and you're barely beating Jacksonville and Indy. So my principle is great. Just all 3 of the other teams were bad enough to where I guess Indy is kind of within earshot of possibly getting there, but they're not going to. And on top of that, they already lost twice to Houston. So they're basically 2.5 games back. But at the same time, the premise kind of still holds is that Houston just took a step back this year, and everybody wants to play them if they're in the playoffs.
So take away, just to drive the final point home, take away the division games. The division, they're 4-1. Yep. They'd be a 4-4 team right now outside of their own division. And that tells me everything I need to know because their division has been so terrible.
Yeah, and then their wins, again, what are they? A bad Dallas team, the worst Dallas team you could have played. A
Patriots.
New England team. Chicago in week 2.
Yeah.
So,
but Buffalo.
And then blowout losses to Minnesota, bad loss against Detroit, like you said, and then obviously Green Bay was close. I think that was a walk-off field goal that they lost to, but
To
yeah.
get one good game out of all of those, basically against against Green Bay. Fine.
Yeah.
Next up though is Washington Commanders. They've actually kind of fallen apart recently, but they did start off so strong that they will be making the playoffs. I don't see a way that they really don't. Especially finishing the year off with New Orleans and Dallas and Atlanta. I think that they can win 3 out of 4 of those games. I don't think they can beat Philly. Philly just looks so hot right now, but the other games I think are winnable for sure.
Yeah, I mean, at least the hard games on the schedule are both at home.
Yeah.
For them, that's at least reasonable. They were kind of like you said, they lost 3 straight. Close game to Philly, close game to Pittsburgh. Nothing
Good teams.
to sneeze at. But then the Dallas loss was not great. But it is what it is. Sometimes these NFC East teams, the bad team just upsets them. It happens all the time. I've grown up watching this division, and it's always happened. So I don't fault them necessarily for it. But at the end of the day, they're set themselves up pretty good to get to 10 wins, which is going to get them into the postseason. And that's a hell of a first year for Jaden Daniels and Dan Quinn at the helm. It seems like everybody's really kind of bought into this new culture. And I just really wish that they would bring back the Indian for their logo and just kind of make it feel even better.
Yep. And then the Los Angeles Chargers, the other team in the AFC West, before we get to KC, they've been playing really good. I didn't know that they were going to be able to do this so early in Jim Harbaugh's era, but he walked in and has a great quarterback, and I guess they're just going to find a way to win every game. They will be playing at KC on Sunday Night Football. That'll be a really great game coming up. But they do have some easier games after that. Tampa Bay, Denver, New England, and Las Vegas are all winnable games. Actually, KC's a winnable game for this team. They're actually really good overall. I
think I'm picking Chargers to beat the Chiefs.
Great.
So
I think the Chargers are going to be moving up our power rankings for sure.
That's the one game that they're going to be dogs the rest of the season, and I'm actually picking them to win that game outright. So that's 12 wins. Obviously, that's probably not enough to get the division because Kansas City is 11-1.
Yeah.
So they need to completely fall apart, a la Philly last year, for that to even be a possibility. But at the end of the day, like you said, really blew their expectations out of the water. Justin Herbert, great bounce back year after a couple injury plagued seasons, has one of the weirdest stat lines this year. 13 touchdowns through 12 games, but only 1 interception, which is phenomenal. What you need, but you want some more firepower from him.
It's also obviously built into Greg Roman's offense that way.
Yeah, Greg Roman kind of aesthetically is not great. J.K. Dobbins on IR now, so they're kind of are running back by committee the rest of the way. Hopefully, Kamani Vidal, our best ball last pick in, is going to help win us some money come postseason time.
That's the plan.
But yeah, they're a really good team. I don't think that really anybody wants to face them. I think they'll end up being the 5 seed because if you look as we transition number 8, Baltimore has to play 3 games in 10 days, including Pittsburgh and Houston, which are 2 tough games, obviously. But obviously, I think that the Chargers have the break on them and being a half loss or 1 loss less. So really, I think they're in a good spot to set themselves up if Baltimore, unless Baltimore just kind of wins out, and then obviously they have the tiebreaker because they just beat the Chargers this past Sunday night.
Yeah. Talking about Baltimore a little bit though, they are kind of all over the place in my opinion. Like they haven't been amazing, but when they are good, they're really good and they can beat anybody. But there's also games where I'm like, hey, like let's get going, and they just aren't able to do that. Looking at that Steelers game a few weeks ago when it was 18-16 game, felt so slow. It just felt like they never got their feet under them and got going. The Eagles played this last week. The Eagles are very good and they were capable of beating them. So I think that Baltimore is good, but I also think that their inconsistencies is going to get them in the playoffs.
Both them and Buffalo, and obviously they've played each other and they beat Buffalo. This year. That was the last loss I believe that Buffalo's had since they went on their big run and they've been killing it. But really, Buffalo and Baltimore, this regular season does not matter. Not a single one of those games matters a lick going into the postseason. It all matters of if you can dethrone Kansas City because neither team has done it. And on top of that, at least Josh Allen has put up the fight and he didn't have the ball last.
Right.
Or botching the 13 seconds, obviously the infamous game.
The overtime bullshit.
Yeah, all that stuff. Lamar has been an awful playoff quarterback.
Yes.
And so he's had a better year than his 2 MVP seasons. But guess what? You haven't performed in the playoffs, so are you going to? And right now, at this point, you're on
Mm,
the outside looking into hosting. So on top of that, if you end up being the 5 seed, let's project they are. That means second round, you're likely going to be playing Kansas City. So you're not even going to the AC title game to face them, and you're probably not going to beat them. And so the thing is, at some point, Lamar needs to just, hey, adverse circumstances, we're not playing the best, but we're going to overcome that, and we are going to be the team that just knocks them the head off the snake that everybody wants to see, because the public is tired of seeing Kansas City win close games against the Raiders and these Carolina teams that just no business being in the same league as them.
right.
And yet you still, for some reason, don't have confidence Baltimore can do that. Buffalo, I kind of have a feeling they might have a shot.
They're pretty good, huh?
But Baltimore, even though Baltimore beat Buffalo, I just don't know if Baltimore has that in them to knock off Kansas City. And that's why it doesn't matter. They could win all 4 of these games. It does not matter. And it's not really going to set me apart as long as Andy Reid's there and Patrick Mahomes is there to be able to knock them off. I want them to prove it to me that they finally can. But until then, I'm just not going to believe they will.
I believe you. I mean, I'm with you completely. Like, I believe that, Kansas City will find a way to beat this Baltimore team. And what's crazy is in the playoffs, I actually feel like they could win by 2 touchdowns and it wouldn't surprise anybody because Baltimore has been so bad in the playoffs while KC always takes care of business. So I am way more confident, like you said, in Buffalo being able to find a way to win than Baltimore. Green Bay on the next spot, they moved up 3 spots, which is actually a really big jump in the top 10. They have been pretty solid. They did just, of course, annihilate Miami in the snow, but we talked about what that means for Miami, of course. Green Bay, though, is actually sitting third in their division behind Detroit and Minnesota, but they've looked pretty solid and they've run the ball really well. Their defense has been playing better. It's they're kind of doing smash mouth football and they're kind of taking it out of the receivers' hands. And that's worked. They beat the 49ers, who we probably came into this year thinking was going to be one of the teams to beat, 38-10 a couple weeks ago. So I think that this team is ready to win some games and possibly make a push for the playoffs. I don't know how far they'll go, but right now, if you look at these standings, I believe they're in the 5th spot.
Yeah. And so Minnesota ends up, again, kind of similar,
6th
both
spot. Sorry.
because they're, both in division and they're close enough to where they're comfortably in the playoffs and they're just jockeying for what I would say the wild card. Even though they're within distance of Detroit, I expect Detroit to run away with this division.
Yeah.
Even though they're only a game ahead of Minnesota and 2 in front of Green Bay.
We'll be playing each other though.
Yeah, they can knock them off for sure. But at the end of the day, Green Bay and Minnesota are fighting for the 5 seed, and as long as Washington doesn't win out, essentially. I don't know which one I have more confidence in. I think Green Bay, just because of quarterback tiebreaker, I guess. But the thing is, Minnesota has been playing better collectively on both sides. So Minnesota, but I don't know. I don't know.
I
really
think
don't know.
I agree with you, but it's more so because I think Minnesota kind of came down from their high. They were playing, like you said, just insane, but then they lost those 2 games in the middle of the year. They've had easier games, but they've played very close. So if you look at they go to at home against the Colts 21-13, good game, but then only scoring 12 points against the Jaguars was pretty ugly. Beating the Titans only by 10, which I think they should, really annihilate the Titans if they're that good of a team. Beating the Bears by 3 and then the Cardinals by 1. It's just they're playing close games. They're winning close games. They did this a couple years ago. But
the thing is, I predicted like some kind of regression because I didn't think they were as good as their 6-0 start was.
You didn't expect Andrew Van Ginkel to be him? You telling
Apologies.
me? Yeah.
But the thing is, I've kept on picking them to just like, hey, they're going to drop against teams that you wouldn't expect.
Right.
They just keep winning those games, even though they're close. They're winning the games. So you got to give respect where it's due. They have the tiebreaker right now over Green Bay, not only in the win-loss column, but the head-to-head. They beat them 31-29.
Mm-hmm.
Really, it's going to come down to that Week 17 matchup, and it's going to be very, very fun to watch between the two teams. Really, that's for the right to face the NFC South champ, and I'd much rather be in that spot. But at the same time, that's probably going to put you in a spot where you're going to play Detroit in the divisional round for the 3rd time. and that's going to be a tall task. I don't know if you'd rather do that or Philly, but
I don't like
know.
either. Truly, both of those teams are scary right now, how they're playing. But I will say, I would rather play in Tampa Bay than I would play in Seattle or
Right.
Arizona or LA against the Rams. So I think that's kind of telling of where I'd rather be. But if you had to choose, I guess that would be my advice. I would side that way. Pittsburgh Steelers 9-3, moving up 4 spots from the number 9 spot, going up against some tough teams coming up. They are going to be playing Cleveland again, who they just recently lost to, and then at Philly, at Baltimore, and then KC on Christmas. And then, of course, Cincinnati's good, so add them to that list. They're the best 8-loss team I've probably ever seen.
Yeah, they just had an 82 point total between the two teams this past week. Obviously, they pulled it out 44-38 in a shootout in the cold. But yeah, Pittsburgh, and on top of that, want to note again, the Philly, Baltimore, Kansas City stretch. That's 3 games in 10 days, and that's just absolutely brutal.
This is the toughest schedule I've seen in such a long time.
And that's why we were so low on them, and it wasn't because of anything to do with the coach or not trusting either quarterback situation. It was just more so that we didn't expect them to start out 9-3, and that's kind of what we thought. We thought you needed to get to 10 wins, and looking back on it, still, I wouldn't be shocked if they lost 4 or 5 going into the postseason, but that still puts them at 10 wins. That's kind of how we ended up, I think, doing our predictions, like basically backing their way in and just not being enough. I think I put them at 8-9. I think
I also had 8-9.
So is what it is. Like, we were wrong on the win-loss column record, but they could still back themselves in the postseason and all of a sudden be a 5-6 seed on the outside looking in, and then if you end up as a 6 seed, for example, because the Chargers are still there, that means you have to play either Baltimore, Buffalo, or Kansas City. And that's just pretty rough compared to, once again, playing Houston. So,
yeah, somehow finding a way to play Houston is kind of what I would want to do. Even knowing Houston will be the 4 seed no matter what. The Steelers will be playing Baltimore at the moment, and I don't remember actually what their scores were. Let me go check if they've played each other yet.
Yeah, so they did beat
Baltimore. Oh, that's right, 18-16. Yeah,
they didn't score a touchdown, and they still beat them. And then obviously they play them on Saturday afternoon in Week 16, right before Christmas. So
yeah,
I mean, they can go in a lot of directions still, despite playing well. But you got to give respect where it's due because they've been killing it, winning 6 of 7.
And that's why they're number 5. It's just, are we confident in them? I don't know yet.
No.
The teams I am confident in are in the next slide. All 4 of these teams, I am confident in the playoffs in that situation. They do have, of course, 5 more games before we get there, though. So the Eagles have been, if you ask me, they've been the best team in the last 4 weeks. Because since we did this last, I think this team has been, to me, the best, like, consistently. I know that, playing against these other teams that they've been playing, they beat the Ravens 24-19. They stomped the Rams, who I think is a good team. They beat the Commanders 26-18, and then also handled, of course, the Cowboys. So
I really wanted to put them above Kansas City. I really did. This is kind of more so 3A, 3B.
Yeah, that's fair.
To me, I did say 5 earlier. I'd say there's 4.5 Super Bowl contenders right now. It's these 4, and I'll give a respectful half to Baltimore. Just to have an outside chance of being one of the teams that could play Kansas City close.
Right.
But at the end of the day, I mean, these are the 4 teams. I think it's pretty simple, self-explanatory that the championship games of both sides are going to be Detroit, Philly.
Yes.
And then Kansas City versus Buffalo or Baltimore.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how I view this thing. If injuries happen, it is what it is. Don't hold me to that prediction. But I feel great about all these teams where they're at. They've been playing phenomenal. Like you said, Philly's actually been playing the best just because they've blown out Dallas and then Washington and then the Rams.
Yeah.
They had a blowout win with Cincinnati, who, even though Cincinnati is 4-8, every team that they're losing to is last second or close or just unfortunate. Well, they didn't let that happen. They
ran away with it. Yeah.
They ran away with it. And then Baltimore, they were a road dog, and I picked Baltimore to win that game. You actually picked the Philly side, I believe. But very impressive. That's a very good quality win that I did not have penciled in to start the year. So being 10-2, responding the way they have, has been really, really strong. They follow up with Carolina, which I think they're the biggest favorite this week. And then, Pittsburgh, Washington, Dallas and the Giants, they're going to be the 2 seed, or maybe the 1 seed, depending on if Detroit loses a couple games. They're just in a great spot, and it's going to come down to those 2 teams.
Yeah, and looking at the next couple games, so basically up there, if you look, you have the NFC 2 teams and the AFC 2 teams. I think by the end of this, Buffalo, like you have, will be ahead of the Chiefs. And so then I think that gives an opportunity for the 6th seed, which will be Baltimore, to play the Chiefs in the round prior, in the semis for the AFC Championship. And then you get Buffalo. So hopefully we get a Baltimore game and a Buffalo game against the Chiefs.
Do you see Buffalo winning out? Look at that schedule up there. 5 games. Obviously, they're going to lose.
I think they lose
3.
1.
Okay. So do you expect Kansas City to lose 2?
Yes.
Which ones?
I think they find a way to lose 2. They're going to lose to the Chargers, and they're going to lose to Pittsburgh.
Okay. All right. Well, that kind of solves it, just because really going into the last week, if Kansas City's within shot of already clinching the 1 seed, they're not going to play anybody, and they'll probably lose that game.
Yeah.
But if you're just going to pretend that Buffalo is in contention and Kansas City has to win to keep themselves ahead, I just don't know if I can see 2 losses in there. But I think both of these teams have a shot to finish 15-2 if that happens. But if Kansas City has to lose 2 games, I'm not sure if I can hold myself to that. But we'll just kind of see what happens. They're the teams to beat to me in the AFC, and obviously Detroit on the other side is our Super Bowl runner-up pick, and it stayed that way, and we feel really good about our Super Bowl predictions, how it ended up. I forgot who the title games were for both, but I'm pretty sure it was something along the lines of these 4 games.
Well, the problem was we didn't know how good Buffalo was going to be because they have no receivers. So I said this the other day, but I think Josh Allen should be considered the MVP because of the fact that this man is doing it without any help.
Yep.
He's kind of doing it alone out there. And I mean, James Cook's been good, but at the same time, like, their defense is playing well, and then you have Josh Allen, and that's it. And he's just making it happen.
Yeah, so. Right now, I believe after last week, this is not updated. Yes, it is. Right now, Josh Allen is a heavy betting favorite for the MVP. He is minus 250 to win the MVP right now. So
I didn't know that. I thought he was like 4th earlier. So no, I'm glad there's some respect.
Weeks, they put him up there, but Saquon's actually 2, which Saquon I talked about last week that he was my MVP. I think it comes down to those 2 teams, or 2 guys rather. But Josh Allen, like you said, is running away with it. He's having his best year, in my opinion, of his career, even if his stats don't reflect that.
So do you want to know who you picked for the AFC Championship playing against KC?
Who did I pick?
Good guess.
Did I pick Houston?
You did not. We actually picked the same team.
Did I pick Baltimore?
Kansas City versus the Cincinnati Bengals. Both of us picked the Cincinnati Bengals.
Yeah, that's not happening, unfortunately. But again, I have more confidence Cincinnati would show up against Kansas City than I would Baltimore.
Fair enough.
But I just don't think, obviously, the gap is too far for Cincinnati to hope that they make the playoffs. But at the same time, if they find a way to get to the 7th seed, that's something Kansas City's not wanting, because if the 7th seed wins in the first round, you're guaranteed to play the 1 seed, and guess who would be the 1 seed?
Yeah.
So you're playing them in the semifinals. That's not a great route. But if you do that, that means Cincinnati goes into it winning 5 straight and then knocks off on the road Baltimore or Buffalo.
Right.
And then goes on the road to Kansas City, which they're the only team to knock off Kansas City in the AFC over the last few seasons. So
on the other side of it, you had Detroit and Philly. And I had Detroit and the Rams.
Okay.
So neither are gone. The Rams were a 6th seed in my prediction, so it wasn't like
you're pretty much right there.
Yeah.
Right now.
So, but yeah, Detroit is the number 1 team because they are the most complete team. They will most likely have the best record or tied for the best record at the end of the year, in my personal opinion. They are just better than everybody. And if you watch our Thursday night video from yesterday, you'll hear us talk about them being better than Green Bay.
And Philly's 2 losses right now, I would predict Detroit to win 4 of the 5 to end the season, but the loss would be to Buffalo. And if that happens, Detroit still has the tiebreaker because they didn't play each other this year. And Philly's 2 losses right now were both to Atlanta and to, who was the second one? It was to Tampa. Okay. So 2 NFC losses. Ironically, the 2 teams that you want to face going into the postseason, if you're an NFC team, they lost to both of them. And but either way, that's the first tiebreaker for teams that don't go head to head. So right now, Detroit is in a great spot. They control their own destiny.
Yep. But that is the end of our power rankings. I think the top four will probably be pretty chalky. After that, you can kind of get a little crazy on some of the other sites, I'm sure. But we appreciate y'all hanging out with us. We really love doing these shows, and these are always a good break from our normal shows going into, of course, DFS and stuff, Thursday Night Football and main slates. But we will be doing a college football pick'em video. So bowl pick'em video next week on Thursday, I believe, one of those days, and that'll be coming out, so you can watch that. And we'll be doing every bowl. Along with that will be a college football bowl pick'em contest on ESPN for the confidence. That will we'll have a prize. So if you want to be a part of that, you have to be part of our Discord or our Instagram, or I will be posting it on YouTube so you can see it there. But it'll be a lot of fun to get the community together and do a bowl pick them together. It'd be a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's really exciting. Be on the lookout for that. We're going to finalize prizes and stuff like that, and make another short to kind of do the announcement. And then Sunday is when that contest is released, and then we'll make another video talking about it. And then Tuesday will be our bowl pick'em show that we'll be recording or live stream.
I'm not sure yet. Okay, I think we're gonna have to just record it.
That's fine. But it'll be out probably the next day or so. But you'll have a couple days to do your picks and confidence rankings. One thing I did want to point out with our power ranking video is that we do this without influence of other power rankings.
Yes.
We don't do tiebreakers based on ESPN thinks this way. The exact top 12 for ESPN was the same as ours.
Wow, I didn't know that.
The only difference was that basically they have Seattle as the next team up, and we had the Rams.
Oh, so
and
13.
Then they have Tampa Bay in between them, which I wouldn't put right now because they got swept by Atlanta. But that's neither here nor there. That just shows how kind of somewhat chalky it is to rank these teams. It's pretty kind of self-explanatory. Really, the only hard part was the NFC West teams, and then obviously who sucks the worst out of the bottom 10,
right?
Like 6 through 10
the
range.
ones that no one really cares about at the end of the day. Because truly, all of those teams, none of them are making the playoffs, and then they all have different kinds of situations. Some are much better off than others, and we'll talk about that later. Obviously, New Orleans we talked about with $62 million in cap hit. They're not in a good spot, and we'll touch on all those things and talk about where we'd rather be if we were coaching those teams or GMing those teams, because you have 18 teams that don't make the playoffs, and those teams have to be talked about also. So
yeah, but until then, we've kind of overstayed our welcome, but we appreciate you guys tuning in as long as you did. If you have made it this far, please be on the lookout for our videos this week. We did a showdown video, our college pick'em going into the college championship weeks,
yes,
and then also our NFL Sunday main, which we had another solid week overall, and we're going to keep on continuing that trend going into December. So until then, we will see you guys next time.
Bye, y'all.